Last week I posted a detailed review of the D780 and quite sensationally declared it the best DSLR that Nikon offers right now. But owing to the length of that video, I couldn't cover some of the features that the D780 does have. So this is a follow-up video to that. If you haven't watched it yet, I'll link it up here. Please do watch it first. So I'm not going to repeat myself and cover those things that I've already spoken about, but these are some more hits and misses that the D780 accounts for. Let's get started. First, the Nikon D780 has a back-illuminated sensor, which was a technology first seen with the Nikon D850, and that typically delivers better performance in low light and other challenging conditions. Of course, Nikon likes to call this the backside illuminated sensor, which is quite amusing, perhaps proving the old adage that the best performance is derived when your backside is on fire. Second, the D780 has the same autofocus system as the last generation's flagship camera, the D5. And that's technology advancement for you, and that is typical in DSLRs, that something which was a part of a much more expensive or much more advanced camera becomes accessible in a smaller form factor at a lower price in the next generation. Third, the D780 has eye detect autofocus in live view mode, and that's just as well, because generally autofocus sensors are programmed for close subject priority. So if you're taking a close-up of a person's face at a very large aperture, then the lens may or the camera may tend to pick out the nose, because the tip of the nose is the closest to the camera. So having eye detect really helps get accurate focus where it matters, which is on the eyes. Fourth, the D780 has inbuilt HDR with customizable settings. I have only one thing to say about this. Why doesn't every camera have this? Fifth, occasionally, just occasionally, Nikon tends to do the right thing. The D780 has a maximum shutter speed of 1/8000 of a second, and so they haven't crippled the camera like they had the previous generation D750. Sixth, the D780 has dual SD card slots. Thank God. That is cool. That's just cool. Number 8, the 780 has something called a low light autofocus mode, and if you go into the menus very happily and excitedly to turn it on, and then you see the information by pressing the question mark button, it says that this might slow down the autofocus of your camera. That's a bit perplexing, because I would have thought the whole objective of having a low light autofocus mode, apart from to increase the accuracy of focus, is to actually improve the speed and reduce the hunting. So I'm not very sure how this works, but I will let you know when I've had a chance to test that out in detail, which I haven't had yet. The D780 already makes your life very easy with a 900-second shutter speed, so that up to 15 minutes long exposure, you don't even need a bulb mode or a remote. But this goes one step further and is really very smart, because what this means is that you don't have to have the shutter button locked for the duration of the long exposure. You can simply press the shutter button once, whereby the shutter opens, and then just leave it as it is for however long you want to expose, and then just come back and press it again and the shutter will close. So thank you, Nikon, for thinking one step ahead of even the photographers for once. And number 10, just to prove that the D780 is a video focused camera and is serious about helping you make great videos, has certain video aids such as the zebra pattern for highlight detection or highlight warning and focus peaking. So those are my top 10 additional hits, additional to what I spoke about in the previous review. Now, it's not just hits, but also some misses in addition to what I spoke earlier that I have detected. So let's get started with that. Oh, actually, just give me a minute. Sorry about that interruption. I just had to get into my devil's advocate clothes. Well, number 1, only 7 frames per second despite having only 24 megapixel resolution. I know in the previous video I have argued quite vehemently that 7 frames per second is quite adequate for most normal photography, but that still does not mean that Nikon can't give us more when it very well can. How, do you ask? Well, simply because the D850, which has a staggering 45 megapixel resolution, which is significantly more than 24 megapixels, can do exactly the same frame rate of 7 frames per second. And what's even better, with a battery grip, it can do 10 frames per second. So this clearly is a case of Nikon not giving us something simply so that they do not cannibalize the sales of their more expensive camera, which is faster, which is of course the D6 or even the last generation's D5. I think this is a wrong attitude, honestly, because like we have seen in other industries as well, most notably with the iPhone SE, there's very clearly a demand for a high performing machine or device in a small form factor at a lower cost. And I think Nikon would actually do well to offer much more feature flexibility in their lower end cameras. So I hope that the D780 replacement will not make the same mistake, or there might be yet another body which offers greater speed at the same resolution at a lower cost and a smaller form factor than the D6. Second, the very topic of a higher frames per second drive rate or burst rate with a battery grip with the D850 brings me to the point that the D780 does not even offer compatibility with a battery grip. Now that is just incomprehensible to me. Maybe the D780 would have been more expensive if they had made provisions for a battery grip to be attached to it, but it's not like the D780 is inexpensive. It's not cheap. It costs as much as the D850. So this, in my opinion, is a huge miss. Nikon made a mistake. They should have allowed provision for a battery grip. It might yet be possible, although the pins seem to be conspicuously absent. Let's just wait and see what Nikon says about this, if at all. Number 3, the lack of in-camera image stabilization. Nikon, just what do we have to do to get this? Please tell me. I know that your mirrorless cameras have in-camera stabilization and perhaps you don't want their sales to be affected, but that is precisely the point. You give one feature to one camera body and then you take it away from another. I can completely understand if the technology of that particular genre of camera prevents you from offering a feature, but when it's very well possible, not offering it, I think, is self-destructive. Honestly, I think you will have many more customers flocking to buy your DSLRs if you accommodate every possible piece of technology in them. And I think in-camera image stabilization is certainly one of them, because it is positively painful, manifestly agonizing to have to buy a VR equipped lens each time, and we very well know that VR in lenses doesn't work anywhere near as well at the sensor level. So I think it's really high time that you consider adding in-camera image stabilization to your next model, whichever that is. And number 4, this is something that Nikon perhaps cannot rest without doing, which is moving a very well-established piece of cheese. Now, what is with the new position of the AEL button? It seems like an afterthought. It's like they had forgotten to add it, and then at the last moment some engineer remembered it suddenly from his Excel notes perhaps, and just scampered to find an empty space for it and just plonked it wherever they could before meeting the deadline for the submission of the design. I understand that the D850 doesn't even have an AEL button. I completely appreciate that, but I would rather leave it without adding it than putting it in a place which is very awkward and completely unnatural and totally non-intuitive. But nevertheless, knowing how accommodating and sweethearts of people Nikon customers are, we will perhaps get used to this new position as well. Okay, now in view of all these new hits and misses that we have added in this video, it's time for the updated verdict. And because we didn't have the budget to hire a judge, as the devil's advocate, I'll have to play the judge myself. And it is my view that despite the updated list of things that the D780 does not do, and the features that it offers in addition to the ones we didn't talk about earlier for all their worth, is still the best DSLR that Nikon offers. And that's that. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.